to victory. As a young English woman, Gladys Aylward dreamed of going to China as a missionary, but she didn't have the means. And so she worked as a parlor maid for a number of years for wealthy people in London before she raised sufficient funds to purchase her own passage. No missionary agency supporting her, purchased her own passage by rail across Europe, through Russia, and through a harrowing story that I don't have time to get into, eventually arrived in China as a single missionary in her early 20s. And when she was there, God immediately hooked her up with a missionary named Jeannie Lawson. Together they opened up a little inn called the Inn of Sixth Happiness. There's actually been a movie, a film made by Hollywood about her life. And so they would try to get travelers to stay there in their inn and so they could preach the gospel, and they did so. And over time, Gladys became a harbor. That inn became a harbor for a number of orphans. In fact, at one point, Gladys was taking care of over 200 Chinese orphans in this inn and surrounding buildings. And this was largely due to the fact that in the late 1930s, 1937, and just a couple of years after Gladys arrived, the Japanese invaded northern China and began to take territory. And honestly, Gladys didn't know what to do. She was trying to take care of the orphans. They were just meager means, barely getting by. How was she going to move orphans? And she was able to get one of her helpers to take at least 100 of the orphans to safety in another part of China. But she still had 100 orphans. What's she going to do with 100 orphans? And the Japanese were taking village after village and bombing areas close to the inn, and she didn't know what to do. One morning she opens up her Bible. Her eyes land on a page that says, flee ye into the mountains. Immediately she takes that as a word from the Lord, what she needs to do. And she gathers up the orphans, and all she has is a basket of millet, a grain, and it's really enough maybe to serve them a meal for one day. And she starts carting these orphans over a harrowing mountain passage away from the Japanese, trying to survive and fighting off hunger and disease and the elements. Eventually she reaches with the 100 orphans the Yellow River, which is at that point the boundary between northern occupied China under the Japanese and the free China that she was trying to get the orphans to. And she waits 3 days on the banks of that river. And one of the orphans asks her, asks Gladys, she said, don't you serve the same God of Moses, the Moses that parted the waters? And Gladys said to the little girl, she said, yes, that's our God too, but I'm not Moses. But she was rebuked by the little one's inquiry about God's ability to part the waters. And so she got on her knees with her orphans and she prayed that God would provide a means to get across. The Chinese were on the southern side of the river. Japan occupied the northern part. And she was afraid if she made herself known, the Japanese might come upon her. But if she didn't make herself known to the Chinese on the other side, they would never send a ferry over to ferry them across. When just about the time she's just praying and finishing her prayer, a Chinese national comes along and she's able to explain her need, and he's able to signal the other side, and a ferry is brought across. And she gets across and eventually by rail gets every one of those 100 orphans to safety in Fufeng, China. Amazing, harrowing story of escape and march through the wilderness in trust really of the God who told her to flee ye into the mountains. It's doubtful that any of us will have any kind of harrowing journey like hers. But we are all on a journey. And that journey is a march that leads to victory for every single Christian. Listen, you are on a journey that will end in victory. Did you hear me? You are on a journey that will end in victory, because no true child of God loses. In the end, we all win. We all win. We march into glory under our great commander, the Lord Jesus Christ, and we have presence in heaven forever. He promised He would make a home for us there. We are marching toward victory.